What is the scariest thing that has ever happened to you that will haunt you for the rest of your life? Happened to me just this past summer, on my birthday of all days. I was with some friends watching a World Cup game on a big outdoor screen. Just chilling, drinking and watching the game in the glorious sunshine. Behind the screen there was this big multi-story car park. The screen and the building were separated by a narrow, walled alleyway. Anyway, out of nowhere something catches my eye on the roof of the car park. A guy is standing on the ledge. I open my mouth to speak, but before I can say a word the dude just jumped. He landed in the alleyway and I'll never forget the sound of his body slamming against the tarmac. Myself and a few others instinctively ran to him, stupidly thinking that maybe, just maybe, he survived and needed help. He didn't survive. When we got to him, his head/face was wide open and his brains were on the floor. All of his bones were broken and some were protruding from his body. I've never seen injuries like that before, and I was very unprepared for that. For a long time, and still to this day, I wonder if he ever imagined that, even in his darkest moment, there were literally dozens of strangers just a few dozen feet away that would have gladly come to his aid, and spent the rest of the night listening to him, and that I would have done just about anything to help him out of that hell. For a while I grieved hard for a tormented man whom I encountered just a few moments too late. When I was about 5 or 6, our stove caught on fire when my parents left a pan unattended. They were making French fries or something that requires a good amount of oil. By the time anyone noticed, the kitchen was pretty much gone and all hell broke loose. My dad bolts straight out the back door, and me being little I try to follow him, crawling on my hands and knees as we'd been taught in school. Mom grabs the pan that's on fire, tries to run and throw it outside where my dad is holding the door open, only she doesn't see me on the floor and trips, spilling the fire and oil all over me. Were it not for my hands covering my head and taking the brunt of the flames, I wouldn't have survived. 3rd-degree burns all over my hands, arms, feet, and head. Docs found a hole burnt all the way through to my skull, and weren't sure how nothing worse came of it. The worst part through the whole thing was my hands though. The first hospital we went to, made a mistake in how they treated my hands, and ended up causing nerve damage in both. I remember trying to tell them something was wrong, that it was hurting too much, but of course no one believed a newly traumatized kid knew better than the trained medical professionals. 5 hospital transfers, months of physical therapy, and a million bandages later, I have some gnarly scars, a bald spot on my head where scar tissue prevents hair from ever growing back, and a debilitating fear of anything hot. No matter how many psychological tricks I try, I'm still incredibly anxious around fire, no matter how small or controlled, even lighters or curling irons can send me into panic attacks. I am from Chechnya and have witnessed more than a few bombings/shootouts in my life as a result of the insurgency here. Probably the scariest happened when I was about 9 or 10. My father and I live in a village in the mountains that was a hot point of the insurgency against Russia up until a few years ago. Russian FSB raids on insurgents there was somewhat common. Anyway, I was walking home from school with some of my friends one day when all of a sudden, we heard really loud bangs/booms in a nearby side streets. So well all scatter like dogs, there were probably 20 or so of us. Me and my friend Kazmat, hide in this back alley for a few minutes, just trying to lay low. The gunfire sounded like it was coming everywhere, so we didn't want to move. Well, after about 3 or so minutes, this guy comes running around the corner, and is holding a rifle. He looks pretty young, maybe around 18 to 20, long dark brown hair, a scruffy beard that looks kind of funny since it didn't fully grow in. I remember he was wearing a gray Puma hoodie. Anyway, he was limping pretty bad as he was shot or hit by shrapnel in the leg or something, and a lot of blood was coming out. We were behind a concrete wall and he fired off a couple rounds to whoever was behind the wall before running out of ammo. While trying to reload, he saw us and yelled at us something along the lines of, "Got her, you kids, why are you here? Run." Memory's a bit fuzzy. Well, of course, being like 10 we're very scared and don't move. In the meantime, his gun jammed or something because he was getting really angry and started crying and hitting his gun out of frustration. Well anyway, right after that, on the other end of the wall a guy with a ski mask and a bunch of armor, Russian FSB, pokes behind the wall, makes the quiet hand movement, motions for us to lay low, then shoots the other guy clean in the throat. He collapses and makes that awful throaty sound people who get shot there make before dying. Me and Kazmat are hysterical at this point because we're both kids and the gunshots are all so ridiculously loud and we're scared we're going to die. Anyway, a few more FSB troops come from behind the other side, shoot the guy's body a few more times for good measure, and then start stripping him, all the while making jokes about him and talking about how they're going to take souvenirs from his corpse and how much they love killing Chernozepy. It means black butt. It's a slur used by Russians for Chechens. They completely ignored us, until one, who I think was the one that shot him first, walks over, tells us to stop crying and go home. He actually seemed somewhat emphatic and patted us on the back as we got up and said something along the lines of, "Sorry you had to see that. But you did good." So we slowly get up and leave. I'm not exactly haunted by it as I don't have PTSD, but it's easily the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. And I was also in the vicinity of a suicide bombing that killed 8 people. And I think about it sometimes. Mine happened 8 years ago now, regarding me and my best friend of 23 years. My friend developed a personality disorder from extensive child abuse, and a couple of months earlier we were both in a car accident where our mutual friend passed away, so naturally we were both quite depressed from that as well. She had no idea what was happening, and that with the depression wasn't mixing too good unsurprisingly. We were staying in a high-rise hotel for a party not too far away and she left a bit earlier than I did, only about 30 minutes prior. Everything seemed normal from what I can remember. I was drunk and just casually walked into her room to talk to her in my drunken haze. She was standing on the window balcony and jumped. I managed to apparently teleport across the room intoxicated and caught her with one mother effing hand, and I have non-existent upper body strength. I remember shaking from adrenaline and having heart palpitations for about 24 hours. We're still best friends and she's doing much better and isn't suicidal. It was the only suicidal thing she has ever done in fact. She's still dealing with the disorder but it's very manageable nowadays 8 years on. It was quite difficult at the beginning but she managed to get through university with it. You'll bet I'll remember that crap the rest of my life. Also, the car crash would be the second scariest thing. I have no idea how 3 of us survived, and I'll tell you the sight of it made me wish I was knocked unconscious. When I was in college I had to have heart surgery. Wasn't open heart or anything, just the kind where they go up through the groin. Anyway, they informed me that during the surgery they might have to lessen the anesthesia and wake me up to get my heart into a particular rhythm. They said it was very unlikely they'd have to do this. Sure enough, there I was mid-surgery, waking up to a bunch of monitors with my insides displayed on them. My arms and legs were strapped to the table, and I could feel all of the cords inside of me. I freaked the F out and started pleading with them to put me back to sleep. It was totally normal for them to have done this in the situation, but I was scared like hell. I kept having nightmares for weeks about being strapped down and tortured, even though I knew they did what they had to do. I was at a red light when 2 cars collided at a 90-degree angle, and as one of the cars slid to a stop about 10 feet away from me, a little girl about 5 years old came smashing through the back passenger window and fell headfirst onto the street. I ran and picked her up and waited until her mom came out to take her. Thankfully, I heard later that everyone involved was all right. My brother stopped responding to my mom's phone calls, asked me to check on him. Went there and kicked in the door because I had a feeling he was dead. Broke the door but the chain holding it held. Saw him laying on his chair through the small opening. Shouldered the door one more time and it was obvious he was dead. Will never forget seeing him through the small opening because of that chain. A psycho girl I dated for like 2 weeks stared at me in the eyes and put a lit cigarette out on her forearm. 4 days later, a gaggle of cops showed up at my door with sexual abuse and assault charges from said psycho. One cop grabbed my collar and was yelling at me. "Did you put a effing cigarette out on a girl's arm?" After literally 2 days of basically interrogating me and assumably speaking to her, they figured it all out. The whole thing was out of the blue and effing terrifying. I feel like the whole situation could have been so bad, at no fault of my own. Turns out she'd had quite the history of this type of thing and had actually lost her license as a clinical social worker due to similar false allegations. Fun side story. I happened to have dinner with her parents a few days prior, and mid-dinner her mother started crying and told everyone at the table that her father forced her to have sex so he could maintain a healthy prostate. Yikes. When I was younger, my father committed a crime that resulted in SWAT teams storming our house. My first ever memory is that of a police officer cornering me in my own house. 18 years later, still have tremendous anxiety at even the sight of a police officer. 3 years ago I was driving down I-95 in the fast lane. The guy in front of me didn't have working brake lights. He's cresting a hill and I'm a few car lengths behind him. As I go up the hill I realize that there's standstill traffic ahead and the guy in front of me had been slowing down. It was too late for me but I hit the brakes anyway. I realized I was either going to rear-end the guy and create a huge pileup or I could veer left and hit the Jersey barrier. I chose the barrier. The car did a couple 360s and I ended up 3 lanes to the right and staring an 18-wheeler in the face. Somehow I managed to pull the car off into the grass before anything hit me, but if I had waited any longer I would 100,000% either be dead or severely disabled. I still get nervous driving on the highway for long periods of time and get incredibly anxious if I ever have to slam on the brakes. But for the most part I'm okay. A bit over a decade ago I helped carry a few dead guys out of an armored car and into an ambulance. Like a testament to its maker, the armored car was relatively intact and the hull and cabin were not punctured. The vehicle had been thrown so far and so fast that the occupants were almost liquefied in their own skin. I remember my buddy saying, "It doesn't matter how strong a hull is if you throw it far enough." The occupants were much harder to carry than normal dead weight as they were floppy and contorted. They bent like Gumby moved. Thinking about it sucks and I occasionally have nightmares. I will definitely never forget it. What happened to make their car go so fast? A large bomb under the road. Last year's earthquake. I was on my way to work, in the bus, when the earthquake started. At first I thought it was something else and not an earthquake because the alarms weren't sounding, but then people started to panic and the bus had to stop. It was an intense earthquake. Then there's a loud crush and the building in front of the bus starts collapsing. There was a lot of dust and water. I thought the building was going to fall and crush the bus. I thought I was going to die. People scream, the bus moves really fast to the next stop and we get out. My legs were shaking and I was sure the city was going to be destroyed. But the really scary part was not being able to communicate with my family and know if they were okay. Public transport stopped working because of the damage in the building, so I had to walk back home. Lots of people were walking, there was a fire nearby and you could see the smoke. Most of us were walking on autopilot trying to use our cell phones, but there were connection problems. After what felt like hours I finally received a call from my mom. She and my brother were fine, but they didn't know about my dad, they couldn't communicate with him. A couple hours later I finally got home, wishing my dad was there, but he wasn't. They still couldn't communicate with him. My mom was crying and calling him non-stop. My aunts called us asking if we knew something about my dad, but no. I was extremely anxious, the most anxious I've ever been. I was crying while watching the news and seeing all the damage, all the buildings that collapsed, all the people who died and the people who were still trapped. Finally, my dad gets home, we hugged him and cried a lot. He also had to walk all his way home and was as worried as we were because he didn't know if we were fine. The next day there was another earthquake and when the alarms started sounding, I passed out. It's been a year and I'm still terrified about another earthquake. I told this story once already, but my mother tried to kill my little bro and she nearly bled him to death and left him a cripple. I copy the story here. The day my mother tried to kill my lil bro to start her life again with her new boyfriend. I was 16, my bro 14. Our mom was a nurse, and to be honest, had always been a crappy mother. We were punched, kicked, slapped, made to sleep in the garage on a daily basis. She had divorced our dad who ended up committing suicide. She totally drove him to it in my opinion, so we were stuck with her. I did once try to contact CPS. Our country equivalent, to them at least. And the first thing those stupid as a donkey butt bastards did was to call her. Boy, I couldn't sit for a week after that, so much she beat me. Taught me to keep my mouth shut and to never ever trust the so-called system. Not saying that to throw a pity party, just so you can get the context here. Anyway, she met up someone, quite rich, not from the country, and here we were, keeping her from living her dream. What detestable, horrible brats we were, daring to be here, alive and ruining her life. On and on, the insults and demeaning words kept, But my bro and I held together, so she had to switch plans. She spiked our morning breakfast juice, and when my lil bro dozed off, she sliced his femoral vein. I will never be thankful enough for the fact that she did miss the artery. I wouldn't have been able to save him otherwise. I hadn't drank all my juice, I already had a roaring ulcer, and I retained enough wits or desperation to drag my bro into the bathroom, lock the door, and scream for help through the window while maintaining pressure on his wound and crying all I could, begging him to stay awake. Stay the F awake, buddy. Cops and ER came in, and that turbo cunt did what? She said, fake crying, that I had tried to kill my bro and myself after, locking us in the bathroom. Effing psychopathic bitch. Cops did drag blood-soaked, hysterical, and snarling me out in handcuffs while my bro was taken to the hospital. I made no sense, adrenaline plus the lil bit of drugs in my system combined, and I was completely incoherent, so they didn't believe me, at first. Spent 6 hours in jail. Not kiddie jail, real adult jail, till my bro got his surgery, woke up and first thing he did was to scream for me. Sure, dear mom had gotten me as I protected him. Truth is, she had nicked me on the throat, but I had managed to dodge enough. It was nothing but a superficial slice. Bitch did only 24 months jail, claimed temporary insanity. I was in a tornado when I was really little. Fortunately, it didn't directly pass over the house I was in and no one died, but I still have nightmares about tornadoes. Storms frighten me, while everyone else around me gets excited about them. I work in the ER and was putting a body to the morgue, and while I was bagging the body I noticed the chest was beating. I put my hand on it and the patient's heart was still beating. I called a code blue in the morgue, which was very awkward for the operator to say over the whole hospital intercom. Code blue to the morgue, code blue to the morgue. All the team responded, only to tell me that the heartbeat was due to the medication they gave him earlier when they coded him. He's still very much dead. I still think about how scared I was in the morgue alone with a possible alive patient. I still wonder about it to this day. Could he have still been alive? A flash flood knocked me out of bed in the middle of the night and pinned me underwater. I have no idea of how long I was underwater or how long it took me to find my children. I have a fear of heavy rain and floods. I expect every rainstorm to cause a catastrophic flood. I now live in a multi-story home elevated 12 feet off the ground. Regardless of weather, I can't sleep unless I'm upstairs, 24 feet above ground. I keep life jackets in the house. The person I trusted the most tried to kill me. I woke up one morning and she was waiting for me, with my gun, a .357. It was an ambush. I got shot, but she fired low, trying to shoot me in the back. She got arrested and charged with attempted murder. Cops also found out she had killed her previous husband, shot him with a .30-30 rifle, in the same living room she shot me. This was 4 years before we met. This was 2005. I am damaged for life. I cannot, trust any human, anywhere. Not a day goes by that I don't think about this. I was raped by a man twice my age when I was 18. He sent himself texts from my phone making it seem like I asked for it. I was so drunk I don't remember that night. I only know I didn't ask for it because a friend of mine was sober and told me the timestamps didn't add up from when he picked me up. I thought he was trustworthy, so he was my sober ride home, to when she saw me back at our dorm. We were gone for hours, but he sent the messages right around the time she saw me at the dorm. Either way, I was barely 18 and couldn't walk on my own. And no one will believe me because he has proof. I asked him to pick me up and then to have sex.